So, I am super excited to have today's guest on the show. Today, I am speaking with Carley Smith, also known as the Fairy Gutmother, which is such an amazing tagline and name. So a little bit about Carley's background, and then I'm going to have her share more about her story because it's really, really interesting. So Carley is a nutritional therapist. She's a certified GAPS practitioner and a registered yoga teacher. And she became interested in health and nutrition after being diagnosed with Lyme disease and using food as medicine, emphasizing gut health to help her heal. So she's been featured as a guest on the Dr. Oz show. She's been featured on NBC Miami, iHeart Radio, MindBodyGreen, a bunch of the big publications. She knows her stuff. And we're going to have a conversation around gut health and sleep.
Yes.
So, Carley, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's talk about your journey, because when we first connected, I thought that was really interesting that you got into this out of your own sort of health pain.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the Lyme's disease and sort of what led you to become the Fairy Gutmother.
Yeah, so in 2014, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. So for anybody that doesn't know, it's just that general tick bite, which I never realized I had a tick bite. I never noticed anything, but the thought is that it was dormant in my system, and then a prolonged period of stress and probably lack of sleep weakened my immune system, and then the disease just flourished. So I went on the whole antibiotics route, which is the most common treatment for Lyme disease, and then eventually felt like it was doing more harm on my body than good. So I went on I stopped all my medication, and I just started doing my own research. And that's when I started learning about gut health, that nearly your entire immune system is located in the gut. So I thought, well, if I boost my immune system, maybe I can suppress the disease, and that's exactly what happened. So I just was so empowered with the progress in my health that I decided to go back to school, studied nutrition, and started Fairy Gutmother so that I could spread this information and help other people.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's and that's tough. Lyme's disease is a tricky.
Yes.
It's a tricky disease. A lot of people, try a lot of different things to try to, heal and get better. And there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's fascinating that through healing your gut, you were able to, take back your health.
Yes.
And it's inspiring now that you're sharing that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I wish I knew at that time that there were so many other ways to healing. And I think that's what inspired me so much to start Fairy Gutmother, is that we think that if you get sick, you go to the doctor and do what the doctor tells you. But what happens when what the doctor tells you doesn't make you better? So, I'm just became so inspired with just this progress in my health, and wanted to share with more people that there are other options out there. And truly, the gut is the foundation for our health. Everything truly does relate back to the gut. So, start there and start peeling back the layers. Of course, I added in other sorts of healing on top of that, as I started learning more about natural remedies and things like that. But the gut really was that really big piece of the healing puzzle.
So we're going to get into the gut, why the gut's important, how it can help you sleep better, how sleep can help heal the gut. And I'll just share a quick story.
Sure.
So I, growing up, had chronic ear infections, and my mom didn't know better, took me to the doctor. Of course, the doctor loaded me up on all types of antibiotics and destroyed my gut. And so I was, I often got sick as a kid, continued to get sick. And even up until recently, just a couple of years ago, had, some gut issues. And, we were having a conversation about sort of some of the things that I did that were, it's very similar to what you did. Yeah. And I'll tell you what a difference, not only in my energy, but my mental clarity and my sleep. I mean, literally, and the funny thing was, it's just like anything else, I think, in health. You don't really realize how bad you feel until you start to feel really good. Like, I thought I felt pretty good right? So let's get into this. Let's get into this. So, first and foremost, why is the gut, the microbiome, why is it, foundational to our health? Like, can we maybe just explain a little bit to people that maybe don't know so much about, the gut, the microbiome? Like, what is it? Why is it important? And then we'll transition into, why it's important for sleep.
Sure. So it truly is the foundation for your health. It's where nearly the entire immune system is located. So if you think about your body's ability to fight off illness or recover, even just, maintain optimal health, it's all really begins with the gut. So what does that mean? Well, when I think about gut health, I think about it kind of a two-part process. It's making sure that you have a nice healed and sealed gut lining, and then you have this nice collection of bacteria and fungi in the gut. So, a lot of people will think, well, how do I know if I have gut problems, or where do I start? And so I just say, if you have any underlying health conditions, always start with the gut. That's number one. And if you don't have any underlying conditions, start with the gut. So it's just, you should always be thinking about, how do I maintain that optimal gut health? Because again, it's where everything kind of resorts back to. So when you think about healing the gut lining, I tell people it's kind of like a garden hose. You want a nice healed and sealed lining. So if you have holes or kinks in the hose, what happens? Water splurting out everywhere. It's unpleasant and annoying. That's the same thing that's going on with the gut. It's allowing toxins to seep in, foods to seep out. So it's permeable, and things are passing through that shouldn't be passing through. So you want to heal the gut lining, and there's a few ways that we can do that. One is through, I think we talked about this, bone broth, and that's my absolute favorite thing. I'm such a huge fan of broth. But basically, you're extracting all those nutrients from the bones, cartilage, collagen, connective tissue, proteins. Those are very helpful in maintaining that nice healed and sealed gut lining. Plus, broth is great for, reducing inflammation, helps your metabolism. There's so many fantastic health benefits of that. You can also just take like a collagen powder or an L-glutamine, which is basically a protein that also helps to maintain that gut lining. But also, maintaining the healthy gut lining also relates back to having that healthy balance of bacteria and fungi. So if you have an overgrowth of pathogens, they can start eating away at the gut lining. So one of the ways to maintain that balance of bacteria and fungi is obviously through the food that we're eating. That's one of the most important things that you can do. So making sure that you are incorporating lots of fiber-rich foods that helps to feed the good bacteria, as well as reducing that processed foods and sugar. And these are the foods that also help optimize sleep as well.
Yeah. So, wow, there's a lot there. I know for me, I definitely had a compromised, gut lining.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to know somebody that was a functional doctor and had an extra test. And she's like, I was like, I think I got something going on. She's like, why don't you take this? It was like a Zolulin test or something like that. And she's like, whoa, like he came back and she was just like, wow, you definitely have you have leaky gut going on. Like we need to seal this up. Wow. And one of the big things that really helped me was bone broth fasting. Like just, a couple days of just drinking bone broth. And I made it in the crock pot. And so I know that works.
It's great.
And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be hard. There's actually a company, here in South Florida where we're recording this, in Publix. It's the Butcher's Bone Broth. Have you heard of that company?
No, but I'm going to have to check that out.
Okay, so I think that they are hands down the best bone broth outside of making your own. Only 3 ingredients. It's not loaded with salt or sodium, which a lot of the other ones that you can buy. And it's, you pour it out and it kind of looks gross when you're pouring it out because it comes out in those like lumps.
That's what you want though. That's the good stuff.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah.
And it tastes great. I actually had a cup this morning.
Oh,
coming and preparing for this. I was like, I need to drink my bone broth.
Nice.
So I heard that. So there's so much what you just said, but I want to talk a little bit about gut and brain connection, because I know the gut produces like 95% of serotonin. Serotonin is precursor to melatonin. This kind of leads us into the sleep conversation. So let's kind of get into, you mentioned some things to optimize to start to do. What would you say is the connection between sleep health and gut health? I mean, we know that most of the body's producing a bunch of things in the gut, from good
Right.
bacteria, bad bacteria. There's, the body is communicating with the brain. They call it the second brain,
Yes.
right? Which I want to ask you about that. Like, why is the gut called the second brain? And also, how can we, what is the connection between gut health and sleep health?
So, there's a lot to unpack in that. I think that, it's really the same sort of foundation any way you want to look at it, whether it's hormone health or sleep health, really all goes back to just making sure that you have that healthy balance of bacteria and fungi in the gut. Whenever you get an overgrowth of those pathogens, it inhibits the growth of those beneficial organisms like melatonin, serotonin, that are going to be helpful for your sleep. So when those pathogens overgrow, then it leads to all sorts of complications. One of them being biofilms, which is basically like a digestive plaque, essentially, that the pathogens team up together and they form this plaque. It makes it very hard for any of the beneficial organisms to thrive. So, that's one of the biggest things. So that chronic overgrowth of pathogens is what becomes dangerous. And then again, it leads away to, leaky gut and things like that. So when we think about, optimizing the health of the gut, it really does go back to diet being one of the first things. So making sure that you're clean eating, and we can dive into that more. But also I do want to talk about our stress levels, because I talk a lot about the gut health being a lifestyle. It's not just a diet. We spend a lot of time talking about food, which is important, but in a lot of my clients, I'll analyze their microbiome, and it's so interesting to see clients with dysfunctional guts that eat very well, and they don't know what's going on. I have the cleanest diet, but they have a compromised gut. And I'll have other clients who, they eat probably not the best, but their stress levels are really low. And the ones that eat well have really high stress levels, and you'll see it in the gut. And the ones that eat, okay, but their stress levels are moderate to low, they have a better collection of those beneficial organisms in the gut. Whereas the people that eat really well with chronic stress have lower amounts of those. And the types of bacteria we're looking for are like the ones that mark for, anti-inflammation. Those are kind of like our lactobacillus. Those are ones that regulate our immune system, but also they're precursors to some of the other more beneficial bacteria that help to promote sleep and hormones and, regulate our body and all of that. Stress is so important. Like, our bodies are designed to handle stress, but more intermittent periods of stress.
Right.
We're so overstimulated, and I'm sure you know all about this with sleep too. I mean, this goes hand in hand. That managing our stress levels is one of the biggest things, and technology, having a bedtime routine, things like that, just help us to detach a little bit and get out of our mind and into our body. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's stress is at the root of like all
It is.
ailments.
It really is.
And it's one of the things that I find is always interesting. People are always, they kind of just don't even realize that they're under stress. Sometimes they do, but it becomes like this chronic underlying. They're operating. They're just going through their day, and they're like, well, I don't feel stressed. But then you start to kind of ask some questions, or, you run like a test, which I'm actually curious what tests you run with your clients. I'd love to learn what tests would be good for people to get, or when you work with people to kind of say like, hey, let's not guess, let's get a test,
actually
right?
See it. Mm-hmm.
So then we can know like, hey, these are the foods, or these are the probiotics or the prebiotics. But the stress thing, it's just people totally underestimate it. And it's fascinating what you just said about your clients that, eat these really clean diets, but have a high level of stress, versus the other person that maybe doesn't eat the clean diet, lower stress. And the higher stressed clean diet people are showing more maybe dysbiosis or gut imbalances or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, that's just like so obvious, but people just don't connect to it.
No, and I think it's really helpful for my clients to actually see that too, because stress is something that's very hard to measure. We can look at a lot of different indications in cholesterol and, things like that, and cortisol, and you can get a lot of different tests, but it's like, it's a little bit harder for people to conceptualize. But it was interesting when I was showing some of the clients with really, great diets, what their microbiome actually looked like, and showed them certain species that indicated inflammation, that were more due to kind of what I call like the lifestyle bacteria, that you're not sleeping very well and, you know, you're not managing your stress. That was kind of what clicked for them. So it almost is helpful for people in that way, that they can kind of see that. The test that I usually use for those clients, and it's from a company called Biome, Biohm, and they also make a probiotic, but they do an at-home gut health test, and you just send it in, and they'll send you a snapshot of it. I mean, you could do it by yourself, really, and not even need anybody to go through, because they have such great information that they'll send you, analyzing your microbiome and kind of help you to kind of navigate through that yourself, which is really nice. So it's not like it comes back in a crazy scientific foreign language for people. Like they break it down pretty well. So, but that I think is really helpful for people to have an understanding that's something that they can actually see, where their lifestyle is actually affecting their health.
Yeah, having those tangible things really truly helps people. Like we use the Oura Ring, which helps people sort of see their sleep metrics. And, you know, one of the things that the Oura Ring does a great job of showing people is, you know, it measures heart rate variability, which is impacted by stress. And so I haven't seen any studies on heart rate variability and gut health, but I'm sure that if there was a study and we were showing like, hey, you know, your heart rate variability is really in a bad place, and we measured the gut, it wouldn't be a shocker to see like a big, you
Absolutely.
know. Yeah, so stress, and I think, you know, there's different types of stress too, right? So there's mental emotional stress, there's environmental stress, there's, you know, so there's stress can come in a lot of forms in a lot of ways. And I know for the gut, you know, environmental stress can be a huge factor as well. And you mentioned, you know, diet, you know, so I guess the pesticides and the things that they're doing to our food. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how that impacts?
Yeah, so talking about environmental stress and toxins, I mean, we're constantly bombarded with toxins. And this is another one of those things where you don't necessarily see it, so we don't think about it. Kind of like stress, it's a little bit harder to monitor because you're not really seeing it. Same thing with toxins, you know, in our air, our water, our food, the home environment, our cleaning supplies, the hair care products. I mean, just everything. There's a laundry list of things that we really need to watch out for. It doesn't mean you need to live in a bubble necessarily, but just being mindful of them, because they all add up. So with food, I mean, that's, you know, a big thing. There's the chemicals and the toxins that are in our system. There was just that article I'm sure you saw the other day about glyphosate being in the urine of samples of most people, which is Roundup, basically. So we're ingesting this in almost every capacity. So it's very important to be mindful about where your food comes from and what you're eating. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to shop organic all the time, because organic can be really hard to find, and right now it can be very expensive. So I recommend people checking out the environmental working groups, Clean 15 versus Dirty Dozen, which basically tells you the foods that have the least amount of trace pesticides used, that are safer to buy conventional. But more than that, I tell people to just get to know your farmer, shop directly from the source. Not only is it helping out our farmers, but a lot of times the certification and the process for organic is so expensive, and they have better practices than the organic label, you know. So it's just knowing, you know, what they put in their food, how do they tend to the soil, their soil health. There's some farmers here at Holman's Harvest that I absolutely adore, and they were talking about how we don't call ourselves farmers, we're soil farmers, you know. So it's not food, it's soil, because everything goes back to the soil. And this is a huge topic for another day, but about soil health and how that absolutely relates to the microbiome. And part of the reason our microbiome is so damaged is because we're not really eating foods with, you know, that come from healthy soils. You're not eating enough fresh fruits and veggies, or the soil is just completely depleted. It's over-farmed. So this whole regenerative ag push is so important. So just getting back to your farmer, you know, see how they're farming, where your food comes from, buying directly from the source, that is so important, and that makes a huge difference. And I will say, allergies are another thing that come back to gut health. So seasonal allergies and food allergies. But it's so interesting because I've lived in a few different places, and whenever I shop from the local farmer in those areas, my seasonal allergies go away. So
wow.
it's, local raw bee pollen or honey, but also those foods, because you're eating the food from that area. You're populating your gut with that environment, and that will help you to build up that immunity to your own environment. So lots of benefits from, knowing where your food comes from and eating directly from where it's local to you.
100%. And connecting that to sleep, if you're having an allergy, or if you're eating something that's creating excess mucus, you're not going to be able to breathe. Maybe you start to snore. Then it's like, it really, everything is connected. And it really, when you start to kind of see that, it's exciting, because then you can start to make these little decisions like what you just recommended, going to the local farmer's market, getting food rather than going to the, the big box store. It's like everything is connected.
It is.
And it's so interesting. I always think it's fascinating how people try to like separate out things. Like, oh no, we're just going to talk about sleep, but we're not going to talk about gut health, or we're going to, or like, we're not going to talk about everything is connected. It all makes a difference. And I think one of the things, people get overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed by the amount of information. They get overwhelmed. They get confused. Like, where do I start? What do I do? And so just keeping it really simple, I think, is always an important piece to this.
Absolutely.
Because it is a rabbit hole. Like, and if you start to, really go down the rabbit hole, all of a sudden, not only does it freak you out, because you start to learn about all these things that we're talking about here, like the pesticides and the depleted soils, but it's like it just becomes too much.
Yeah, it definitely does.
So, but I love that simple step, and that's very interesting about the allergies, eating locally, and how that sort of helps with allergies and
Oh, it is. It's so interesting. And I think allergies play a huge role in sleeping as well, because I think if you eat processed food and, a bunch of crap before bedtime, that's going to absolutely affect your sleeping patterns. Like you said, mucus, allergies, snoring, you have that inflammation in your sinuses. So that absolutely goes back to the kinds of foods that you're eating. And that's one of the things that I'll tell my clients to do too when they do a food journal when I work with them. And I put a column down there for any feelings that you have after you eat, any thoughts, anything that's going on in your mind. Are you noticing that you are more stuffed up, or maybe, you're noticing that you have a little bit more anxiety, or, where are you at, in addition to maybe any bloating or digestive discomfort. Look at everything, because as you said, everything is related. So I think that's really important. And then people will start to make the connection like, oh, maybe that is not so good for me. I didn't realize, that was, and it can be something that that health halo effect we really have to watch out for, because people think we're doing better. I'm eating gluten-free, or it said, vegan on the label, but you have got to check the labels, because, you might think you're doing well, but if there's a laundry list of ingredients, you're eating a processed food, whether you like it or not. So you just need to be mindful of those foods, what's in those foods, because those can also be very triggering. Man,
I know for me, the one thing that it just like really pisses me off is the processed oils in the health food, like the canola oil or the hydrogenated oils in these, literally like, you look at the front and you're like, oh my God, this looks awesome.
Yeah.
You turn it around, you start reading the ingredients, and then there's like sunflower oil or safflower oil or hydrogenated canola oil or something in there.
Right.
And that's so inflammatory for so many people. And it's just like this thing, it looks like, if you didn't really know to look for those, it's like, wow, it really is. You have to be so kind of present,
right?
Because it's just so easy to look these little things, and then over time, you start eating that thing, something you enjoy, and then you're like, your gut
does
just
a lot of damage.
It's like putting an atomic bomb in there over time, right?
Right. And I tell people too, the cool thing about the gut is that it handles moderation. So we don't have to live in a bubble. The microbiome changes within 24 hours. So you can, go through the holidays and enjoy whatever, but make sure you're having a balance in there, because it's when it's chronic that's a problem. So some of these more processed foods, and I know a lot of people have dairy sensitivity, so they're like, oh, well, what do I do? Some of the more, they really are the alternative dairy is processed, in a way, if you want to call it that, but just checking those labels. So you don't have to live in a bubble, but just be mindful that if you're eating alternative dairy, gluten-free this, replacement meats, replacement pasta, and you're looking at all of those ingredients that you've consumed the entire day, that's when it over a long period of time, that's when it becomes a problem. But, if you have just a little bit moderate amount, and that's the same thing that goes for just kind of indulging and having dessert or, a birthday party or anything like that, the moderation is what's key.
Yeah.
Just being mindful of that, because it definitely adds up.
For sure. I know it's so easy to kind of fall into the habit of eating certain foods, and then it becomes a little bit more than moderation. And then it's like, but I love that you said that, because it is so important for people to realize that you can have ice cream, you can have some processed food. Like, you got to live your life. It's not about like being perfect.
Exactly.
Right. It's about being, making progress.
Right.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about gut health and sleep, kind of bringing it back to the sleep conversation, is digestion. Like, I know when you improve your gut health, it also obviously improves the effectiveness of your ability to absorb nutrients, and just the overall digestive process. And I know, like, if you're trying to digest your food because your system is compromised and your body really, you're sleeping, your body's not doing the things that it really needs to do during the night, because it's, you got a bunch of sludge and it's really important. And I know for me personally, when I improved my gut health, my deep sleep, I got higher quality sleep. And I really feel like it was because my digestion improved. And this is kind of personal, but also, flatulence, like that's a real thing. That's a real thing, and my wife will laugh when she watches this. But it's like, when I improved my gut health, that totally went away. Like, I was having some issues there, and my wife's like, "Oh my God, thank God," because that could keep your partner up.
Oh yeah, for sure, it keeps yourself and everybody else up.
So there is. I mean, so when we're talking about digestion, we're talking about so just kind of like a recap here. Eating local, eating nutrient-dense foods, avoiding the foods that have the pesticides, managing our stress, which I do want to kind of touch a little bit, kind of circle back into that. We'll put a pin there. What are some other things that you know of that, working with the people that you work with, that really help improve their digestion? Is it supplementation? Is it sort of a combination of all these things? But I really think that most people need support with their digestion. And obviously this is totally relevant here. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up, because that's one of, when we talk about small, manageable choices to make, that it doesn't have to be complicated and overbearing. This is one of the things that is the most important and effective way to help support the gut, is just through supplementing with a digestive enzyme. Okay. Most of us have too little stomach acid as opposed to too much. And our stomach acid levels decrease as we age, starting by the age of 20. And then anytime you have stress, prolonged periods of stress, medications, diet, all of these things can diminish or weaken digestive enzymes. So just supplementing with an enzyme that helps to, with either plant-based, or bromelain, pineapple, papaya, certain herbs can help stimulate your digestive enzymes, or you can get enzymes themselves like hydrochloric acid and pepsin, naturally occurring enzymes in the gut, helping to break down your foods, and just taking them with your meals. And that helps to boost those stomach acid levels and digest those foods a little bit better. Because one, obviously, if you're not digesting your foods, it's going to lead to more complications. Also, you're getting those toxins into your system. So we're meant to digest our foods and kill off the toxins in the stomach. And if we're not doing that, those toxins are heading to the gut. So, but absolutely making sure that we're digesting properly. Also, if your gut is compromised, you're not absorbing the nutrients. So if the gut is leaky, you absorb most of those nutrients through the gut lining. So if that's compromised, or maybe if there's a biofilm or that basically plaque that's lining the way that it can't absorb into the gut, causes huge problems. And those nutrients are, again, important for precursors for the melatonin and helping us sleep. So digestion is definitely one of the first parts to making sure that we're breaking down our foods properly and getting that whole system started.
And I know, so enzymes, are there particular enzymes that you recommend? Is it kind of like depending on what the person's struggling with? Is there a type of company that you really love?
Yeah, you bet. So it does, kind of depend on where people are at, and what their situations are. But the one that I found to be the most universally helpful for people is called Zenwise.
Zenwise, okay.
Yes. So they make an assortment of different kinds of enzymes. The most effective ones for my clients have been their no bloat and just their plain digestive enzyme. And they're also great because they contain some probiotics in there as well. So it's helpful that if you're traveling or, you forget to take your probiotic, you're getting a little bit of those bacteria in your system. And those bacteria are also helpful and catalysts in the whole digestive process. So those are awesome. But, you can also do more plant-based enzymes, like, again, looking for bromelain, papaya, and even just food, using kind of food as medicine as you're eating. Sauerkraut, fermented foods, kombucha, which is a fermented Chinese tea, that can all help you digest your foods. And bone broth, I don't want to, just keep talking about bone broth, but I'm such a huge fan. It does actually help to support your enzymes. It actually helps boost your enzymes, your digestive enzymes. So broth can be very helpful to sip on with your meal or after a meal as well.
So, is with enzymes specifically, do you want to be taking enzymes with your food, or do you recommend that you take them like on an empty stomach? Doesn't matter.
Some will say, you want to take it on an empty stomach 30 minutes before your meal, depending on what you're taking. I just usually recommend a little bit before if you can, or with your meal. If you forget and you can do it right after, that's okay too. But ideally with the meal is what we're looking for.
And do you think that with that your body sort of gets let's say I started to supplement with enzymes and then I stopped taking them, like, is it like my body's going to now I almost like need
rely
these
on that?
Yeah.
That's
What's your thoughts on that?
Question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's not like your body gets dependent on it. I think it just boosts the levels. So it helps support that. And again, thinking as we age, those enzymes naturally decrease. It's just one of those things that's kind of just good for good housekeeping measures. And you don't necessarily, if you aren't struggling with digestive issues, it's not like something you necessarily have to take every single meal. You might just take it with a large meal. Or if you're traveling or dining out and you're eating foods you don't normally eat, I absolutely take an enzyme with those because you're getting foods in your system that are a little bit more foreign. Maybe your body doesn't really recognize it as much. Say you don't hardly ever eat ice cream and you go out and you eat ice cream. You might consider taking an enzyme for that. So that's just kind of helpful. And like I said, just use it as more of a good housekeeping measure.
Got it. Awesome. Another thing, digestion, kind of speaking about so it starts in the mouth. Most people don't chew their food. This was like a huge thing, for me at least, speaking from my own experience, when I sort of started to mindfully eat and actually slow down and chew my food, 20 times. It's hard to start to do that, but exponentially that helped improve my digestion because there's enzymes in our saliva, right? That sort of start to break down some of the foods. And I think most people think, oh, digestion, it's only in my stomach. It's like, no, like as soon as you put food
in the mouth. Absolutely. No, there's an entire microbiome in your mouth. So oral health and the oral microbiome is huge. And some of the research even says that your oral microbiome reflects your gut by like 98%.
Wow.
So if you just did an oral swab, you could actually see probably what's going on in the gut. The gut is kind of the mother of all the microbiomes on the body. But so if there's issues with the mouth and you're not digesting or, you have thrush, which is an overgrowth of candida or the pathogenic yeast in the mouth, generally there's probably some gut issues going on as well. So you can work at it from both ways. But yeah, this is where you secrete your digestive enzymes. And to even go back and touch on the point of stress, you have to be in that parasympathetic state in order to digest. So I tell people you have to rest to digest. So most of us in this overstimulated lifestyle that we have, we are eating on the go. We're not paying attention to digesting our foods, eating in the car, and that sends a message to our brain that it's not time to digest. We're thinking about work or our to-do schedule and, what we have on the agenda, and so we're not properly digesting our foods. So it's important to be, like you said, it just goes back to what grandma says, like chew your food properly, take a breath, like the old school thoughts, but there's so much truth in that. And you're able to secrete the enzymes, break the foods down, and then your gut can properly absorb it.
Yeah, I really, we're getting back. And this stuff is free too. You don't have to,
Exactly.
it's like even if you just started to slow down, chew your food, it would make a difference in your digestion.
Absolutely.
And another thing I kind of wanted to bring up and just kind of jamming on the gut and digestion thing. One thing that I realized personally also is of eating a variation in my diet. Like I was eating the same things. They were healthy things, but over and over again. Like I'd make the same smoothie, like banana, blueberries, almond milk, peanut butter, or whatever. And I did that for like a really, really long time. And then I started to notice that like I would get like bloated and gassy and just like not feel sluggish. And I'm like, wait, I'm eating like, this is like good stuff. Like what's going on here? And sort of when I sort of dove into like, healing myself and all that, I just changed up what I was eating, and that made a huge difference for me. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it goes back to eat the rainbow. There's so much truth in that. It's so easy to get stuck in that rut, especially if you're just cooking for yourself. You've got, your things that are super simple for you to go grab and easily prepare or whatever. And we just get into that routine of this is easy, this works. Right. And we sort of forget to switch things up a little bit. So that's definitely important. And the way I make sure that I'm switching things up is each week I kind of have something different that I'll grab and prepare. That's why shopping from your local farmers can actually be very helpful, because they have stuff that comes up on the farm that's different. Each week if you do the CSA, which basically kind of gives you like a share of what they have harvested that week, and that gets you to try different things, and you're also eating what's in season, which is also helpful as well. But so just making sure, and you don't have to change everything, but just kind of pick around with some of the ingredients. Maybe pick one or two things that you can change up each week. Maybe it's your main source of veggie. Maybe it's one week you do cauliflower, the next week you do broccoli. So just kind of thinking about it that way, and that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, so bone broth, chewing the food, digest the enzymes, eating a variation in your diet, making sure that you're getting, if you can, local foods. Yes. Let's talk about probiotics.
Good topic.
Yeah, I mean, this is a confusing topic, I think, for a lot of people,
is.
and it's such a huge sort of, in the last couple of years in the health world, everyone was talking about probiotics. And so, let's why is it important should we take a probiotic? Are they necessary? Can it help heal the gut? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would kind of joke about this. When I first started out with gut health, it was in 2014, and there was hardly anything out there about gut health. I mean, even bone broth, like you couldn't go buy broth in the store at that time. I couldn't find bones, no one, it was very foreign for people. There was a little bit out there, but not nearly what it is now. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse, because there wasn't a lot of information. I really had to dig to find things. But I actually felt like, at least it wasn't overwhelming. And now I can't imagine for people that are just sort of trying to scratch the surface of gut health and get into it. There's just so much, the aisles are flooded with probiotics. Yeah. How do I know which one for me? There's probiotics for women, probiotics for sleep, probiotics for, probiotic for anything you want to think about. There's probably a probiotic for it. So how do I know which one's right for me? What bacteria? Do you go on the low end? Do you go on the high end? So it's definitely hard to navigate. But what I just tell people is start out low, on the spectrum. 30 billion CFUs, or colony forming units. That's basically just your unit of measurement for the bacteria. Okay. And they'll show you that on the label. So I try to, I would try to stick to something on the lower end. And the more is not always the merrier when it comes to probiotics. Oh. So when you're getting a ton of species in the gut, some of them you don't even really need, but that can also have an adverse reaction. So you could have gas, pains, bloating, diarrhea, all sorts of things. So you want to make sure that you're kind of easing into it. And yeah, looking for something that has a little bit lower amount of the CFUs, and then looking for something with like a lactobacillus. I generally recommend, I love the spore-forming probiotics, which are a little bit different than a lactobacillus, but I think both are very important and necessary for the gut. But the spore-forming bacteria, they are very hardy. So they pass through the entire digestive tract and actually get to the gut where they need to be. So that's helpful as well. So there's a lot of different things that you can kind of look out for, but just start out slow, low on that low end, and then kind of start like one every couple days, and then go to every day, work your way up to it. So that way it's not a huge, shock to the body.
Got it. So low and slow.
Yes.
That is great advice. I love that. So many people just want to be like, give me the 30 billion CFU.
Huge amounts, or taking kombucha and sauerkraut and the probiotic. It's like, it is too much. You're going to feel that tomorrow.
And then they're living on the toilet.
Yeah.
And so you did mention a couple, natural foods that have probiotics in it. Kombucha, the fermented tea. I actually used to get a keg.
Fun.
And I would swap it out every month. And then I actually got some testing, and they're like, don't have kombucha, like too much of that going on in the system. Which is interesting, probably maybe because I was drinking it too much.
But I think that's a really good point to make, because just because it's a good thing doesn't mean that, it can be excessive. And kombucha is one of those things you really have to watch out for. You have to check the labels on that too, because it's kind of like the new soda in a way. It is, yeah. So many of them have sugar as the first ingredient, so you just have to really watch out for that too. So it can be a good thing, but just have to check that.
I used to actually make my own.
Oh, that's the ideal. That's amazing.
But it was like nasty. Like
really?
I had this, it was in this big thing, and the mother, like like that.
SCOBY.
The SCOBY, and it was in my cabinet, and it just looked so gross. And like, I just was like, I need to find a better way. And this is back, this is maybe, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I was healing my leaky gut. Mm-hmm. And I found at a local farmer's market down in Miami, a guy that was like supplying, bars and restaurants with kegs. And I was like, hey, is there any way that I could, and he's like, yeah, I'll do it. So for like a couple of years, actually, I was like one of his customers.
That's awesome.
But then I was a little bit too much, and, so now I'm drinking other things. But yeah, so kombucha, there's sauerkraut, kimchi, right? What are some other foods that are naturally fermented that people could eat sort of to sort of help with the probiotics and the flora and all that? Sure.
So yogurt is another one, yogurt, dairy. Yeah. But one of the things I absolutely love is making my own homemade yogurt. And it sounds time consuming, but it's not. It's absolutely, you could just get a starter packet from the store. You throw that in with the milk and let it culture, let it sit out for, 8 hours or 12 hours or so, and you'll have yogurt. That actually has more probiotic content in it than store-bought yogurt. And it can be a little bit easier to tolerate on the gut. So I've had clients that have horrible dairy issues, but they can tolerate their own homemade yogurt. So, and you can control the ingredients. One of the things that they are doing with store-bought yogurt, again, you have to check the labels, is putting a lot of sugar into it.
Right.
So it's not necessarily, it can be good, but you just kind of want to make sure that you're doing the right thing with that. Plus, if you have dairy issues, you could make it with like a goat's milk, which is a little bit easier to digest than cow's milk. So that's something that you can absolutely do. There's, I was going to say, making sure that you're also getting enough of that prebiotic into your system, which prebiotic, it's like a fiber. It isn't exactly fiber, but what it does is it feeds the bacteria in the gut. So fiber acts as a prebiotic, making sure that you are getting enough of those beneficial organisms or those foods to help promote the beneficial organisms. So yes, sauerkraut, kimchi, all the food as medicine approaches for the probiotic, important, but making sure you also have that food in there. As I tell people, you can eat a probiotic all day long, but if you're stopping at McDonald's every day, it's not going to do any good because the bacteria is alive. They're hungry. They get to the gut. They want to eat. If there's no food, they,
So
die.
Feed them. You got to feed the gut good stuff. Prebiotics, I guess. I know inulin is a prebiotic, right?
Correct. Inulin, yes.
Inulin. Mm-hmm. Some other prebiotics.
You can
starches
get. There's resistant starches. So one of my favorites is potatoes. I'm a huge fan of potatoes, and so I think that's another thing. People were scared to eat some of these foods because I think we thought that they might be potentially bad for us, but they're actually not. Potatoes are a resistant starch. Resistant basically means resistant to digestion. It breaks down in the large intestine by becoming food for those beneficial organisms.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So potatoes are a really great source of resistant starch. And those, prebiotic fibers or those resistant starches are, again, what's really helpful in feeding the good bacteria. And then they also produce, not to blow people's minds, but they produce what's called a postbiotic, or basically a short-chain fatty acid. And one of the most common ones that you might see is butyrate. You can actually buy butyrate or a postbiotic and take that as a supplement as well. So you've got prebiotic, acts as a fiber, feeds the bacteria or feeds the probiotic, the living organisms. And that whole kind of metabolic process yields what's called a postbiotic, or basically that short-chain fatty acid. And that ends up being what's kind of the main fuel source for the cells in the large intestine. So that also helps to keep that gut lining healthy. Wow. And that helps to facilitate a lot of those, the process of creating like melatonin and serotonin and things like that.
I haven't heard of that.
Well, I will mention that because I think more people are now starting to talk about postbiotics, and I just think it's important to mention. So, it's because it can get overwhelming and confusing. It's like, whoa, it's a probiotic, and then what's a pre, and now the post, but it's basically this whole process.
Right. And potatoes, now is it all potatoes or just like a specific potato that? So
it's just your regular kind of like russet potatoes are the ones that are generally have more of the resistant starches in them. And the way to prepare them to kind of boost that is you boil them and then immediately cool them. So you could throw them in an ice bath, throw them in the refrigerator or the freezer, but that boiling and immediate cooling is what really helps to boost those resistant starches in the potatoes.
That's a secret right there.
Yes.
Yeah, hopefully people are listening.
Yep.
I was actually just in Peru, and they have some of the best potatoes. There's I think over 400 variations of potatoes.
Crazy, yes.
And the food, talking about soil health, their soil, they do it like, they don't have industrial farming down there. So all the soil is it's like the Amish or like back in the day, and the food, you could taste the nutrition.
Absolutely.
Like you could taste, it sound weird, but like you can taste like the vitamin C in the orange.
Oh, sure.
It was wild, how good the food was. And one of the things that we were on this little excursion to this island where there was all these birds, and there was these vats where they're collecting the bird poop to put into the soil.
Wow.
Yeah, like just stuff like that.
Amazing.
It's like, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a little sidetrack story about
I love that.
Peruvian potatoes and bird poop. So
circle of life.
Yeah. So getting back to, so we just kind of we're talking about probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics, some of the foods we could be eating. I was reading something that was really interesting, that our gut bacteria also have a circadian timing system, which is really fascinating. So, every cell in our body essentially has a clock. And since our gut bacteria I think we have more gut bacteria than cells. Is that true?
Correct.
So I can only imagine that there's going to be more and more research and studies showing like, hey, this is how important this specific, gut mechanism, microorganism, we call it microorganism? Microorganism, in your gut, how it's related to your circadian health. And I just thought it was really fascinating. There's not a lot of research that I've seen yet on that. But I know that, when we're talking about sleep health, circadian clock is super, super important, keeping the body in a rhythm. And I know with gut health, also sometimes people get in these rhythms where you get hungry at a certain period of time. Is that related? Do you know if that's related to like microorganisms kind of signaling to the body, hey, it's time to eat, like ghrelin and leptin? Is that kind of connected to the gut as well?
Absolutely. There's a study that's my favorite study to share with people. It's called the Milkshake Study, and it's by researcher Alia Crum. And this is my whole theory on why the holidays and stress and eating during the holidays is less about food and more about our stress levels. Because what she did was she devised this study. She gave people the same milkshake, but one was labeled census shake, fat-free, basically low calorie. The other one was indulgent, decadence. It was like the real deal. And she gave it to people, and she measured the is it ghrelin?
Ghrelin,
Yeah, ghrelin, the hormone for, when you're hungry, that spikes, that basically tells the body that, we need to eat. So she measured that, and what she noticed was that and when that spikes, then that basically helps, your body, your metabolism spikes so that you digest your foods. And what she noticed was that the metabolism skyrocketed for those that were eating the indulgent shake versus those with the sensus shake. But they're the exact same milkshake. So that tells you a lot about the gut and the brain and what we think and how we feel when we digest our foods. These people were probably like, oh, this is fat free, like who cares, whatever, this is no fun. And these people were like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I love this milkshake. This tastes so good. But, there's absolutely a relationship between the gut, the hormones, and the brain, and how we digest our foods and how we assimilate those nutrients. Because absolutely, if your metabolism spikes and you're digesting those foods a little bit better, that goes back to these people. It's like probably not so much of a, digesting the food, lowers their metabolism. So that can also lead to, other complications down the line.
So it's almost like it's like our minds can influence what's going on in our gut.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is fascinating.
It is. Yes.
And sleep too, going back to the ghrelin and leptin sort of. So ghrelin is the hormone that signals, feelings of hunger, and then leptin sort of the signaling hormone for, okay, we're full. Right. When your sleep is off, those hormones get all whacked out. And and I was actually reading about this. They did a study about people that had jet lag.
Oh,
and
interesting.
They measured their guts. And so they measured before and they measured after the jet lag, and the gut was totally like off.
Wow.
Just from a couple of hours of changing some time zones. And so when that's off, then ghrelin, increases, leptin decreases, and then you start craving like the sugar and the fats.
Right.
And then that gets you in the other kind of, you're like just adding on to the amount of stress, because now you're eating a bunch of crap that you shouldn't be eating. And then it's this vicious cycle.
It is. It really is. But that's so interesting. And if you have an overgrowth of those pathogens in the gut, they start telling your brain what they want to eat. So that's like kind of a sigh of relief for a lot of people that suffer with cravings for long periods of time, that it's maybe not you, it's your bacteria. And once you start getting that under control, generally those cravings will subside. So if you have an overgrowth of Candida, the pathogenic yeast in the body, then that will tell the brain that it wants to eat sugar and starchy carbs and breads and noodles. And so that's one of the things that if you can get that under control, generally those cravings will subside.
Wow. So that brings me back to another study that I was reading about how now they're finding that the gut communicates more to the brain than the brain does to the gut. Like, so it's like cool. like a bottom up system, not a top down, which is like what you just said, essentially. And I know I have like a sweet tooth, so maybe I should like, maybe I got to get my Candida checked here because.
Well, again, it goes back to the moderation thing. I think it's okay, it's a once in a while type of thing. But if you have those chronic cravings like that you're waking up in the morning and you want a Snickers bar, it's just one of those types of things that you might want to think about.
Yeah. One thing too, and I know you're huge, we're kind of going back to the broth here, but there's glycine in bone broth, which is amino acid, I believe. And that is super helpful for sleep. So, drinking a lot of times people are like, oh, but I'm so hungry, I need to eat. I need to have something in my stomach. And I always say, well, if you want to have something, you could do a little bit of liquid, and bone broth would be great because it has glycine in it, which actually helps relax the system. And so I'm a huge fan of bone broth. And so do you make your own?
I do. It's a little bit more cost effective, I feel like, to make your own than it is to buy from the store, because you can make a lot and you can freeze it and have for, whatever on hand. But it's very, very simple to make. So I think people kind of get all nervous and intimidated about bone broth. You can make it as easy as just getting a whole rotisserie chicken from Whole Foods, get an organic rotisserie chicken. You can use that meat on the bones for all your meals or whatever. Take the carcass, throw it in a pot, put some carrots, onions, celery, salt and pepper in there, fill it with water and let it simmer for, 24 hours. You can also throw it in a slow cooker. Very, very simple. Strain it, and then there's your broth. You can sip on it as is. I like to freeze it in ice cube trays, and then that's way, one way, if you just want a cup of it, you just pop a few cubes out, or you can use it in all of your cooking. That's another thing too. But it lasts for generally about a week in the refrigerator as well. But that's a great way to get started. The chicken's the most, palatable. I think people can tolerate the chicken broth. Yeah. If you want to go a little step further, you can just go to butcher department. Again, in Whole Foods or online, you can find good local sources for just knuckle bones, marrow bones, oxtail, and you cook it exactly the same way, kind of throwing things in a pot. There's some different variations you could do. You could roast the bones before. That gives it a little bit more of a flavor. But again, bones, some veggies, water, and simmer. That's pretty simple.
Pretty simple. Yeah. That's you don't have to be a master chef to do that.
No, definitely not.
I think sometimes people have to get over like the bone thing. Some people have like this thing around bones. They're like, oh, cooking bones. It's like,
then that's when you can just do the chicken carcass and be good with it. You don't have to even handle anything raw or scary or intimidating. The chicken just fine.
Yeah, that's a good starting place for people.
It is, yes.
So question for you. So when you had Lyme's disease, you went on this journey, you really understood, okay, gut health's where it's at, you healed yourself. Did you notice a difference in your sleep when your gut improved? Like, you have any insight there?
Absolutely. I was a disaster before I started on the gut healing journey. I mean, with Lyme disease, my sleep was absolutely impaired. I remember there was a period where I had been up for over 24 hours straight. I mean, I didn't even feel like I wanted to sleep. I just kept going. I mean, I didn't have, it was the first time in my life where I didn't feel like I wanted to rest, like I couldn't sleep. So obviously, the doctor doing what the doctors do is give you a medication for it.
Right.
But when I started on my gut healing journey, that was one of the first things I noticed was the cognitive function and cognitive clarity and the sleeping patterns, what started to improve. Like I started getting more restful sleep.
Yep.
I also lost a lot of memory. I forgot where I lived driving home from work. So
wow.
I couldn't really leave my apartment much. I was kind of scared. But when starting to incorporate, more broth and good quality fats into my diet and cooked meats and vegetables, which was part of the GAPS diet, which was the diet that I started on for healing my gut. And that was when my memory started to improve. I started to recall things, think clear, sleep better. So absolutely, that was probably one of the biggest things where those little tiny things that I noticed that I said, okay, I think this is working. I actually can see some improvement.
Yeah, and I imagine, you're sleeping better, and there's so much research that shows when you sleep better, you can think better.
Yes.
And again, it's like everything's connected. So you're healing your gut, then you're able to sleep better, higher quality sleep, which then allows you to think better, which also, it's like the brain fog. It's just, it's fascinating. It really is. And do you have, as far as like your sleep now, do you have like a bedtime routine or a bedtime ritual or anything like that you follow? Or?
I do actually. I try not to be on my phone so much before bed, and I will try to do reading. I don't really like to watch a lot of TV, but I'll like do something just to take my mind off of work and calm my brain down. Because if I don't, then I absolutely am up. So that's a big thing for me. I really try hard to practice what I preach. I mean, I talk about being overstimulated, and we are. I mean, it's constantly bombarded. We have our phones on us all the time. It's media, everything all the time. So it's very important for me, at least, to make sure I'm, not looking at my phone as much, just more focusing on, going to bed, taking a shower, taking an Epsom salt bath, something that kind of calms you down. It's just those little tiny things to help your body realize, like, okay, now we're, going into sleep. Yes.
Yeah, it's all those little things make a huge difference. For me, it's a hot shower and reading. Yes. And I make a lavender mint tea from this company called Rishi. I love their teas.
Oh yeah, they do make great teas.
Really good teas. Premium product, but you're worth it. Right. And you get what you pay for. Yeah. And so that's cool. So it sounds like, and I know you also were a yoga instructor. Do you ever do any type of like yogic breathing or anything like that? Is that sort of still part of your life?
I do yoga almost every day. So I don't teach anymore, but I incorporate it into kind of everything that I do. I talk a lot about yoga for gut health. There's certain poses that help to support the gut. Of course, reduce your stress levels, get into, it's anything basically though that gets your mind, or gets yourself out of your mind and into your body, just, reducing that, kind of getting back into that parasympathetic state. So breathing is a huge thing. Breathing techniques, meditation, just anything being mindful. Yeah. Talking back, about just being simple little changes that you can make. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be sitting there counting your breath can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is.
All connected.
It really is.
So I know you have a great course for people to check out, and can you tell us a little bit as we wrap up, where people can find you, and also share, like, how do you work with people? Like, what does that look like? Do you have one-on-one clients? I know you have this awesome course that I was going through. It's loaded with great information, really simple and just professionally done. I loved it. But yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about like what how you're helping people, and then we'll wrap it up.
So I work with people one-on-one, basically to help them to restore their gut health. So I'll send them a lengthy questionnaire and a food journal. I'll analyze all this information, then put together a protocol for you that's diet and supplements, and then I basically work with you as we start incorporating the supplements into your routine and the dietary changes. Every gut is unique. The gut is like a thumbprint. It's completely unique to you. So I've never once recommended the same protocol twice for someone. Even though they might have similar or same supplements, the way they go about integrating them as well as dietary changes is different for everybody. So I would do the, one-on-one with people, and it's all, over the internet and phone, so people can be kind of anywhere. And then in addition to that, I have my course online, so you can either purchase that. That's an 8-week program. You can move at it at your own pace, but it's a diet that I've put together. It's backed by clinical research in Case Western University and University Hospitals in Cleveland. So it's a diet that we've put together that actually shows that it optimizes the health of the gut.
Wow.
So the diet does work, and it's a very easy to follow, and a diet that's easily assimilated into your routine and your daily life. It allows a little bit of flexibility. It's applicable for vegans and vegetarians as well. And you can do that by yourself, but you can also have my help as you go through that as well. Cool. And there's cooking demos, recipes in there, so all sorts of information in that course as well.
So we'll definitely put a link in the description and the show notes for the course and how people can get a hold of you. Fairy Gutmother on Instagram and all that stuff, YouTube and all that good stuff. So really easy to remember, the Fairy Gutmother. I just love that.
Thank you.
I should name myself like the Fairy Sleep Father or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much, Carley,
thank you for having me. Awesome.
Like amazing, such good information that people need to hear. I definitely learned some new things, which is awesome.
Great. Yes.
So I'm sure people are going to love listening to this. And for those of you that are listening, just take action on a couple things. Don't get overwhelmed. We talked a lot about a lot of things. We kind of, we went far into a lot of different topics. But just take whatever resonated with you and take action on it, because that's really where you see change. Yes. And also too, if you need support, reach out, because you don't have to do it on your own.
Absolutely. There's a lot of support out there, a lot of good information. Just little tiny steps go a long way.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining me. And until next time, everyone, sleep well. And all right.
Happy gut health.
Happy gut health.